Mike Jones, a 14-year-old boy with messy brown hair and a passion for baseball, was walking home from practice on an ordinary afternoon in the small town of Crestwood, nestled in the heart of Illinois. Crestwood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the streets were lined with oak trees, and the sound of children playing echoed through the neighborhoods. It was a town where people felt safe, where the idea of crime was something that happened elsewhere. But on this particular day, the peace of Crestwood was shattered, and Mike's life would change forever. Mike had just finished his baseball practice at Crestwood Park, his bat resting on his shoulder and a worn glove dangling from his backpack. He was humming his favorite tune, a song by his favorite band, as he made his way down Maple Street. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the town, and Mike was looking forward to getting home, having dinner, and maybe playing a video game or two before bed. But as he turned the corner onto Elm Street, a police car screeched to a halt beside him. The officer who stepped out of the car was a tall, stocky man with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. His name was Officer Greg Lawson, a veteran of the Crestwood Police Department with a reputation for being tough, but not always fair. Mike froze, clutching his backpack tightly as Lawson approached him. "Hey kid," Lawson barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "Where were you an hour ago?" Mike's heart skipped a beat. He had never been in trouble before, and the sight of the officer towering over him made his stomach churn. "I was at baseball practice, sir," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Why?" Lawson's eyes narrowed as he studied Mike's face. "We got a report of vandalism at the park. Witnesses say it was a kid with a bat. That you?" Mike's eyes widened in shock. "No, sir. I would never do something like that. I just came from practice. You can ask my coach." Lawson didn't seem convinced. He took a step closer, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Is that right? Mind if I take a look at your bag?" Mike hesitated for a moment, but he knew he didn't have a choice. He handed over his backpack, his hands shaking as Lawson unzipped it and began rummaging through its contents. Mike's heart sank when Lawson pulled out a can of spray paint, holding it up like a trophy. "What's this, huh?" Lawson demanded, his voice dripping with accusation. "You expect me to believe this isn't yours?" Mike's jaw dropped. "That's not mine. I don't know how it got there. I swear." But Lawson wasn't listening. He smirked, clearly convinced of Mike's guilt. "Save it for the judge, kid," he said, grabbing Mike's arm and leading him to the patrol car. As they drove to the police station, Mike's mind raced. He thought about his mom, Sarah Jones, who would be worried sick when he didn't come home. He thought about his coach, Mr. Miller, who could vouch for him. Most of all, he thought about how unfair this all was. Why didn't Lawson believe him? Why was he being treated like a criminal when he had done nothing wrong? When they arrived at the station, Mike was processed like any other suspect. His fingerprints were taken, his belongings were cataloged, and he was placed in a holding cell. The cold, sterile environment was a stark contrast to the warmth and familiarity of Crestwood, and Mike felt like he had been transported to a different world. He sat on the hard bench, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what was happening. Hours later, Mike's mom arrived at the station, her face pale with worry. She was accompanied by a man Mike had never met before, James Callahan, a seasoned defense attorney who had been called in to handle Mike's case. Mr. Callahan was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a calm demeanor. He introduced himself to Mike and assured him that they would get through this together. "Mike, I need you to tell me everything that happened," Mr. Callahan said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Don't leave anything out." Mike recounted the events of the afternoon, from the moment he left practice to the moment he was arrested. Mr. Callahan listened intently, nodding occasionally as he took notes. When Mike finished, Mr. Callahan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're going to fight this, Mike," he said. "You're innocent, and we're going to prove it." The next few days were a blur. Mike was released on bail, but the weight of the accusation hung over him like a dark cloud. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't focus on anything except the upcoming court date. His mom tried to reassure him, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She had always been his rock, but now she was just as scared as he was. The day of the trial arrived, and Mike found himself standing in a courtroom for the first time in his life. The room was filled with people, lawyers, reporters, and curious onlookers, all there to witness the case of the baseball vandal. Mike felt like a stranger in his own life, like he was watching everything unfold from a distance. The prosecutor, a man named Robert Phillips, wasted no time painting Mike as a delinquent. He presented the can of spray paint as evidence and called witnesses who claimed to have seen a boy with a bat near the scene of the vandalism. Mike's heart sank as he listened to the lies being told about him. He wanted to scream, to tell everyone that he was innocent, but he knew he had to stay calm. When it was Mr. Callahan's turn to present the defense, he called Mike's baseball coach, Mr. Miller, to the stand. Mr. Miller was a gruff but kind man who had known Mike since he was a little boy. He testified that Mike had been at practice the entire time and had never left the field. "Mike is one of the most dedicated players I've ever coached," Mr. Miller said, his voice firm. "He's an honor student, a good kid, and he would never do something like this." Mr. Callahan then presented security footage from Crestwood Park, which showed a group of older teenagers with bats and spray paint. None of them resembled Mike, and the footage clearly showed that they were the ones responsible for the vandalism. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, and Mike felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his arrest. "Your Honor," Mr. Callahan said, addressing the judge, "this evidence clearly shows that my client is innocent. The real culprits are still out there, and it's a travesty that Mike's life has been disrupted because of this baseless accusation." Judge Harris, a stern man with a reputation for being fair, turned to Officer Lawson. "Officer, why wasn't this footage reviewed before the arrest?" Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I thought—" "You thought wrong," Judge Harris interrupted, his voice sharp. "This boy's life was disrupted because of your negligence. Case dismissed." The courtroom erupted in applause as Judge Harris slammed his gavel, and Mick felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He turned to his mom, who was crying tears of relief, and hugged her tightly. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe again. But the story didn't end there. Mr. Callahan demanded an internal investigation into Officer Lawson's conduct, and the Crestwood Police Department was forced to take a hard look at its procedures. The department issued a formal apology to Mick and his family, promising to improve how cases involving minors were handled. Mike's story spread through Crestwood, becoming a rallying cry for justice and fairness. Mike returned to his normal life, but he carried with him a new determination to stand up for what was right. He knew that not everyone was as lucky as he was, and he wanted to make sure that no one else had to go through what he did. He started volunteering at a local youth center, helping kids who were at risk of falling into trouble, and he became an advocate for criminal justice reform. As for Officer Lawson, he was reassigned to desk duty and enrolled in mandatory training. The incident served as a reminder that justice isn't just about laws. It's about doing what's right. Mike's courage in the face of injustice inspired the town of Crestwood, proving that even the smallest voices can echo loudly in the halls of justice. In the months that followed, Mike's life slowly returned to normal. He went back to school, rejoined his baseball team, and even started dating a girl named Emily who had stood by him throughout the ordeal. But he never forgot what had happened, and he made a promise to himself that he would always fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. One evening, as Mick sat on the porch of his house, watching the sun set over Crestwood, he thought about everything he had been through. He thought about the fear, the anger, and the helplessness he had felt. But he also thought about the strength he had found within himself. He realized that he had grown in ways he never could have imagined, and he knew that he was stronger because of it. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Mick made a silent vow to never let anyone else suffer the way he had. He would be a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the innocent, and a reminder that justice, no matter how elusive, was always worth fighting for. And as he sat there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of Crestwood, Mike knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.